So, welcome back to the studio. This is our second in the series of our lockdown videos for you, and we've been asked an awful lot about this subject actually, so hopefully you'll find this one really interesting. I've called it Which Driver Suits My Game, and we're going to do it in three parts so it's not too much information all at one time. And this first part is basically focusing on the head of the driver, and probably going to give you some information that you didn't know a lot about, and certain things that the manufacturers don't put in their adverts because it's not particularly sellable information, but it's really interesting to know when you're choosing a driver. So stay tuned, bear with the sciencey bits because I promise you it's interesting, and we'll advise you on what type of head of driver you should be looking at for your type of golf game. Okay, so let's start having a look at head designs. First of all, before we get on to the modern day drivers in front of me here, let's show you one from the sort of mid 1990s, and this was literally one of the first metalwoods that came out to replace the persimmon that came before it. And you can see by the size of the head here compared to a modern day club, I'll show you the two there, absolutely vastly different in size. And this really was the advent of the start of the designs that we see today. The advantage over going to this small metal head back in the 90s was that it was hollow compared to a persimmon-headed wood, which if you've ever taken the bottom off one of them, you'll see it's full of a massive load of molten lead. And with the club being hollow, the manufacturers are able to start playing around with the internal weight of the club because that has a huge effect on your ball flight. So the first thing that you generally look at with a golf driver head is when you probably pick it up in the shop or see it in an advert, and you actually decide pretty soon, straight after seeing it, whether you like the look of it. And different manufacturers that are available on the market go for different looks, if you like. The Ping driver of the last few years has had these sort of turbulators, I think they call them, on the top, which has given them a sort of Marmite effect in the market. People either love them or hate them. It's also got a matte black finish. If you look at the modern day Callaway Maverick as a alternative, you can see they've gone for a glossy finish here in black with orange trim all around it. So the look of a head is going to be one of the first things which attracts you to whether you want to play with it or not. Secondly, which I can't show you just at this point on the video, is the sound of the club as it hits the golf ball. So different manufacturers go for different sounds. You may recall 15 years or so ago that all the new metal drivers sounded like you were hitting a clay pot, but they've realised that that's important now to get the sound right, that people like certain sounds. Some people like more of a tingy sound, some people like a duller sound. So once we've established the looks and the sound, let's get into a little bit of the detail of what goes on in a driver head that makes it suitable for your game. Okay, let's get involved with the inner workings of the driver head. And what I'm going to be talking about here is the centre of mass. Now it's not an attractive title. You'll notice that all the manufacturers don't use it in their advertising campaigns, but it's probably the most important factor in how a driver head performs on the golf course. So just imagine, if you will, this Ping head here. Imagine it was see-through. In the middle of that golf club head, somewhere suspended literally in the middle, would be the centre of mass of the golf club head. And where you strike the ball in relation to the centre of mass is vitally important as to what happens to that golf ball leaving the club face. So generally, the centre of mass is obviously aligned with the centre of the club face this way, generally, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And generally, it is towards the back of the club, the tail end of the club here. And these are some of the golden rules. So if the centre of mass is put nearer to the back of the golf club, it makes the sweet spot on the club face much, much larger. If the centre of mass is put towards the face of the golf club, up near the front here, the sweet spot is an awful lot smaller, and it will have a huge effect on backspin in terms of reducing it. So we're beginning to see a backward positioned centre of mass increases the forgiveness of the club because the sweet spot is bigger. It also increases the backspin, which in turn increases forgiveness. If you move the weight forward towards the front, less forgiving, requires a more centred strike, but will create less backspin and therefore potentially give you more distance. Okay, so we've seen what happens when we move the weight from the back of the club to the front of the club. It affects the spin, it affects the forgiveness. We can also move the centre of the mass across the golf club from the heel to the toe, and the manufacturers will either do this built into the club, or they'll give you as the user the opportunity to change it yourself and experiment a little. If I show you here the Ping SFT version of their driver, it's the same driver, but SFT they say stands for Straight Flight Technology. What they've actually done is they've taken the tungsten weight at the back of the club and moved it from the centre towards the heel. Now it's permanently in that slot on this club, and there's actually even additional weight on the inside of this club on the heel. So they have moved the centre of the mass of this club much nearer to the heel, where my index finger is here. That means that when you strike the ball off the face, any ball that you hit to the right hand side of the centre of the mass will be given hook spin free of charge. That's just a law of physics. I don't really want to go into explaining it here, probably because I can't. But similarly, the opposite occurs if you put all the weight into the toe of the club or the centre of mass towards the toe and strike it to the left of the centre of mass, you're going to create fade spin automatically. So you begin to start not only changing the elevation of the shot and the backspin on the shot, but we can also start to change the shape of the shot just by where you have the weights in the head. That's the SFT version of the Ping. In the same driver, but in their normal plus version, we get the weight separately, the tungsten weight here at the back, and we get a great big groove right around the club where we can actually put the weight either in the centre, the heel or the toe. And this is the sort of thing that Harry and I will be doing when we fit you for a driver. We'll be moving the weight to accommodate your technique and get the most out of your driving for you. All the manufacturers pretty much in their ranges offer basically a heavily draw-based driver, one that's fairly neutral, and then a low spinning option. So it's important that when we fit and when you come for a fitting, that we make sure we get the right head for your swing type. If we look at the Callaway version, just as comparison, this is their, if you like, their standard model. The weight, the tungsten weight is at the centre at the back, big sweet spot, slightly higher spin. But their Sub-Zero version, which is the one which promises lower spin and therefore potentially more distance, has two holes. I've taken the weights out of this because you can move these two tungsten weights, you can see them there, between the slots at the front and the back, and one is considerably heavier than the other. So you can shift the centre of mass yourself once you own the club, and we can do it during fitting to optimise the flight for you. So it's not really a question of which brand of driver is going to suit you best, it's the type of head and where the weighting is, and if you've got any movability in the weighting that's going to make the driver more suitable for you. Now it is fair to say that certain brands have certain tendencies towards driver. For example, you'll never hear a Ping advert running that says we do make the longest driver on the market. It's not something that they use as a selling tool. Ping are renowned for making the most forgiving driver on the market, and that certainly is the case from our last few years of testing them in the studio here. So you're going to get a little bit more backspin off a Ping, but you're going to get a huge sweet spot, and therefore for the type of person who wants to hit more fairways, is like, you know, wants to give up a few yards to hit more fairways, and the consistency, Ping wins out every single time on consistency and letting you get away with the odd bad shot. If you want to go for ultimate distance and you fancy that you're going to centre the strike very regularly, then TaylorMade and Callaway really do make drivers where the selling point is ultimate distance, and these probably are going to be more attractive to you because your best shots are going to go further than the Ping with lower spin and have a chance of you getting further down the hole. So come and have a look in the studio at all our drivers. We will fit you to the right one, but hopefully just knowing a little bit more about how the centre of mass works and affects the ball flight will encourage you to have a look at your driver and see if it works best for you.
Have a quick look at these figures here. This is how we decided to show you how the weighting works. We hit an awful lot of shots so that we got two shots that had identical characteristics in the swing. So they were both exactly the same path, swing path, and exactly the same angle of club face at impact. Both of them were actually slicing actions very slightly. The swing path was slightly out to in, and the club face was left 2 degrees open on both occasions. So the neutrally weighted driver created the shot shape that you'd expect. The ball started slightly left, faded back to the middle and just finished just right at the centre of the fairway. A very good shot. But with exactly the same credentials, the draw-based driver actually created draw spin. So with a face that was open at impact and should have been cutting to the right, it's turned that round and created a shot which moved 9 yards in the air from right to left. So if you are someone who moves the ball left to right too much and doesn't want that slice anymore, a draw-based driver, it may not turn you into a drawer, but it will certainly reduce the amount of side spin, and this in turn will give you more distance as you're not throwing distance away with side spin. So these are the sorts of decisions that you make depending on the type of golfer you are, the type of swing you have. The head of the club that you choose can help to work with your game to give you a straighter ball flight, a higher ball flight, more or less spin, whatever is required to make your drives more reliable.
So that concludes us looking at the technicalities of the head of a driver. I hope you've enjoyed it, and stay tuned for part 2, which focuses on the loft of the club. In the meantime, take care. See you soon.